Oh hey, I'm Marc, an art teacher, a professional artist, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to add background to your character art. So if you've ever gotten to the point where you have a character, you got that out of the way, but now you really want to add something behind that character, something to make it look even better. This is the tutorial for you. And you'll see, it's surprisingly easy. Let's get started. Alright, welcome to this week's tutorial. If you've ever been in a situation where you drew a character or maybe colored it like me, but had no clue, or maybe just a few clues, how to tackle the background, well, you'll want to keep watching. Now, in the best case scenario, we shouldn't be in this situation at all. I would have planned my illustration ahead and sketched out the background along with the character when I was at that stage earlier in the process. But I didn't. Oh god, why no? We can always add one after the fact. We just have to keep a couple of things in mind to really make sure that it fits the character since, well, that piece of the puzzle is already set. The character is done. To create the background, we'll definitely want to be careful since it can actually ruin everything. Everything! If we don't do it well. Of course, if done right, your art will look way better. I think it's a risk worth taking. In the next couple of minutes, I'll show you 3 different types of backgrounds that I usually do depending on my needs. Something quick and easy, something cooler but not as quick, and the coolest option of them all, but we'll get to that one last since it also happens to be the longest. Of course, I'll show you how I tackle those different backgrounds, what to look for and what to avoid. A lot of these tips are things that come up often with my students, so hopefully it'll help you too. I'm not here to waste your time, so let's go right into it and create a quick and easy blurry background for my sword girl here. But before I start painting, let's have a quick look at these things here, things to keep in mind for every single one of these types of backgrounds. In yellow here, this will only be applied to the full scene, so we'll look at that last. But for now, in order, and I think this is what makes the most sense, but first we'd want to look at the colors, so basically figure out which one is going to be the main dominant color for the background, based, of course, on the colors of the character. Then we'll want to make sure that the values are correct as well. Usually with distance, the range in values tend to shrink a bit from the bottom up, so from the darker colors first. The result being that everything is always a little bit lighter in the background. Then we can always look at texture, and by that I mean more like the busyness of the background. Is it going to be something that's pretty bare, pretty simple? Or is there a lot of texture there, a lot of noise, a lot of details? And then finally, I have this one last because you might not have any lights in there. But let's say you do. In my case, I certainly will. We'll want to make sure that the lights are consistent across our entire scene. But yeah, none of this will be a mystery once we're done with this video. So starting with the blurry background here, the first thing we're going to look at, well, is the color. So what kind of color am I going to require for my background? And if you want to play it safe, what I recommend before you get real good and confident and, are able to take some risks, I would highly recommend that you use a complementary color for your background. Now, what do I mean? There's already complementary colors going on here, right? Red and green. But the contrast that we're looking for here is between the main character and the background. So here we'll want to figure out what's the overall color for our character. So we can kind of just squint and look at it, and what's the dominant color? In my case, I have a lot of red, a lot of beige, oranges, purples. So it's a very warm color palette. And if I were to average all these colors, it'd probably be something like a light brown. And so what I'll want to find is a complementary color to that for my background. Probably something like blue. If you want your characters to pop, it's also a good idea, just in general, to use cooler colors for your background, because cooler colors tend to recede in the distance, while warmer colors will always appear a little bit closer. But yeah, now that I have my main color, what I want to use is anything that I can blur for my background. So it can be a photo, it can be like a Google image. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and just reuse this image here, flip it on its sides, scale it up a bit, and blur it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and overlay that on top of my darker background that I already had. And then using like a multiply or overlay or hard light modes For my layers, I'm just trying to find something that's not too busy, almost like she was in a scene, but it focuses on her and the background is completely out of focus. But yeah, if the first thing to keep in mind was the colors, the second thing will be the values. So in my case here, the most obvious choice would be between a darker or a lighter background, and you really can go either way. It's just based on your preferences, but for best results, you'll want to make sure that you use values that are different from the average values of your character. So for example, if your character is really bright, then you'd probably want to contrast that with a darker background, right? We'll want to make sure that we reserve the most contrast for the character and tone down the contrast and values for the background. Then once you have your colors and your values kind of set, I really like to do a bit of a pass where you look at the entire silhouette of your character and you try looking for areas where the values of the character and the values of the background are similar, and you try to get rid of those. Once again, we want to make sure that the characters pop. Here's a good example between this part of the shoulder and the background here. We can look at the values there, very similar. So I'll just want to increase the contrast between those two here. So either by darkening the background locally in that particular area. Now the silhouette really pops, or we can just brighten it as well. Whatever works best. We're just trying to make sure that the silhouette reads well. Now we can move on to the third thing here to keep in mind, the texture. In this case, I'm not going to have a whole lot to say, but basically you want to make sure that the amount of texture that you have in your background does not compete with the foreground with your character. In this case, it works pretty well because my character has a decent amount of details and the background doesn't have much. So it's clear where you should look at. Our eye is attracted to details after all. But let's say I had a lot of details in my background instead, something like that maybe. Well, all of a sudden it kind of looks like garbage. And the main reason here is that, well, we have a lot of details to look at in the back here. So our attention now is divided between the character and the background. It's like, oh, there's stuff in here, cool. Of course, in this case, we don't want that. Now the same kind of result might happen if you were using a brush that has a lot of texture to it, you know, something where we could see all the brush strokes. Once again, that's something that might be working against you in this case. So be careful with that. Basically, when it comes to the blurry background, keep it blurry. And then finally, we can move on to the lights. And so here, it's just going to be a matter of making sure that the lights is consistent across the board. So we want the same kind of light source on our main character and on the background as well. When it's something a little bit more blurry, a little bit more abstract like this, not as relevant, but usually light comes from the top, rarely comes from the ground. And so with a big soft brush set to like overlay mode, I always like to select a color that's similar to the color of my background. So in this case, kind of like this light blue. And then really quickly, just add a little bit of light at the top here, just to suggest that there might be some light source somewhere in there. And just like that, we have a nice blurry background. Now, let's move on to number 2 here, where we're going to be building a very simple background, essentially just like a wall with a shadow cast on it. So I'm starting with the shadow here. Basically just took my flats layer, made it completely black, and then tinted it, and then added a little bit of a tint, scaled it up, slightly offset it to the side so that it looks kind of like a shadow cast on a wall. And then in the back of the scene here, I'm going to add just a little bit of texture so that we understand that it's potentially like a brick wall or something like that, or more like a concrete wall. Once again, you want to go very light on the textures so that they don't steal the show. Yeah, this is really what I mean with a simple background. You know, this is really nothing to this. I'm just adding a bit of a sky here just to make it a little more interesting. But it's pretty common that this is going to be what I call my final pieces, with just a shadow on the wall like that. Because yeah, as you can see, it takes no time. It looks pretty cool. And when it comes to everything else that you have to keep in mind, very similar to the first blurry background. Still no storytelling, still really no perspective to speak of. Just making sure that we have nice and cool colors in the back. In my case here, I have the wall that's a little warmer, but the shadow itself being this light, cool purple, that still occupies a pretty significant portion of the background, along with the sky that is blue. All of those things help balance the colors. After that, just want to make sure that the values in the background don't compete with my character. I already talked about the texture. And then when it comes to the light, very similar to the blurry background, we're going to add just a top right warm light on that wall facade. And by the way, if you've been watching my tutorials for the last couple of months, you've seen all the steps that I use, to create this particular character. So how I treat my lines, how I treat my colors, my shading, all of those things. I have tutorials for all of it. Amazing. But yeah, you can find the links to those down in the description below. The videos have been doing really well, so I'm guessing that they are helpful. So check them out. But yeah, when it comes to that step, that's it. As you can see, very simple. Some other things that you could do would be maybe like a background where it's just fire, like flames and smoke. Maybe it's just like a snowstorm. What we're talking about here is something that's just a little bit more than just a blurry image, but still working with very few elements and keeping the challenge quite low. Looks good. Moving on. The final background now, level 3, which is going to be a full scene. Now, just like for the other two, this is still here going to be very, very important in this case, but we'll also add storytelling and perspective to the mix. So let's start with storytelling, because this is going to be the first thing that we think about when working on a new background for one of our characters. Why? Well, the main reason you would do that in the first place is because you want to convey a better story for your character. Place your character in a setting that will contribute more information about your character or about what's happening in the scene. So maybe she's not just posing for the camera right here. Maybe she's actually mid-fight with somebody else. And so, very important before we actually do anything is to think about what we're going to be portraying here. And well, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking that she's out questing, you know, let's say she's like the character of a video game. She's out questing and killing monsters. So I don't know, I'm feeling like painting something cozy. So what I'm thinking here is going to be like a field behind her, maybe a forest somewhere back there, a path to represent that she's, you know, maybe on her way from one destination to another, like from one city to another, not just randomly in the forest. And probably like 1 or 2 dead NPCs in the background, like dead creatures. Creatures whose butts she kicked. And then when it comes to the colors, it'll be very similar to what we've done so far. So a cooler background, cooler colors for the background, just like the other ones. And then moving on to perspective. So this one might be a little harder to show in this case, but this is one that you really don't want to mess up. Because yeah, it's one of those that can easily just break your entire drawing. So the first thing that we'll want to do here when thinking about perspective is to figure out where the horizon is going to be in this painting. Once again, if we had started by constructing the scene and then placing the character in it, we wouldn't be having this problem. But now we have to figure out, well, is the skyline going to be here, down there, or all the way up here, or in the middle, or where exactly? And to figure that out, you can always look at your character for clues. The main thing you have to keep in mind is when looking at your character, are you looking down on your character or are you looking up? In her case, it's a little ambiguous because she's kind of hunched forward. So we can see the top of her shoulders, we can see the top of her head. We can't see the underside of her chin. And so our point of view is definitely higher than hers, which would indicate that the horizon line is higher in the canvas. But how high? Well, in my case here, I would need to try and imagine what she would look like if she was just standing straight. And so if her entire torso was straight, her shoulders would probably be up here, her head would be up there. So up here, seen from below, meaning that the horizon line would be lower than that. But I already know that it's going to be higher than probably my pelvis. So what this tells us is that it could easily be in this area here. So anywhere within this range should probably be okay for this character. Now, real quick, if she was standing straight, or if there was anything in your scene that had some perspective, some clear perspective lines that you could trace from, then, well, we'd be able to find out exactly where the horizon line is. In this case, you can look at the shoulders here. So 1 point here, 1 point there. You can trace that line. You can do the same thing here with the tip of the toes. So 1 point here, 1 point there. Find out where the intersection is. I'm out of canvas here, but it will probably be right about there, meaning that the horizon line, well, it would be on that point, and so somewhere around here. Even more simply, with simple cylinders like this, looking at that one, well, we can see the top of it, so clearly our point of view is higher, meaning that the horizon line would be higher than this. If we look at that one, we can see the underside, and so this indicates that the horizon line would be lower. And then this cylinder here, we can't see the top and we can't see the bottom, meaning that this cylinder is overlapping the horizon. Right here. So this is a whole different story when it comes to perspective. But as a quick tip, you know, try to look for these lines here. So let's say the character has some belts or maybe a collar or just the angle of the sleeves. Try to look at the curve angle. If the curve is pointing down, then probably the horizon is above that. If the curve is pointing up, the horizon will be below. Easy peasy. But anyways, if we keep going down our list here, when it comes to the values, very similar to what we've seen so far. Once again, we don't want to have too much texture, but in this particular case here, we'll want to really pay attention to the lights, because whatever light we paint on our background, we'll have to use a consistent light setup for the character as well. So, for example, if this is going to be an exterior scene with the sun shining down maybe from this angle and lighting up the mountains on their right side, well, I want to just do the same thing for the character as well. Let's go. Now I'll be super speeding through all of this because it's basically the same as the environment art tutorial that I posted not too long ago. The important things to keep in mind here were all those things in the list. When it comes to actually creating an environment, what I'm doing here is basically exactly is almost exactly the same thing that I do in my tutorial that you can find in the top right corner of the screen here, and of course down below, making sure I use the perspective line that I established based off of the character. But yeah, those are the three types of backgrounds that I usually will make for my characters. The first two in particular when I don't want to spend too long working on the background. But yeah, give it a shot. Let me know what you think. Also, if you want, I'll be putting a link to my brushes down in the description below. You can get them for free. And I'll be adding the line art for this character here to my pack of practice files that I've recently uploaded onto my QBrush store. Once again, you can get it for free. Link down below. You guys know the deal. If any of this helps, and if you create something cool as a result, please share it with me on social media. Tag me in your Instagram stories or on Twitter. And well, I'll try to repost as many as I possibly can to send some of my traffic your way. So wrapping up this environment here, nothing to it. But yeah, now I'm pretty much done with my background here. Of course, we need to add some little NPCs in here. There we go. Aww. Oh, and something is not quite right here. Of course, I forgot the light on the character herself. Let's turn that on. Much better. All right, so this is going to be it for today. Now, I do want to point out that she is not done at all. So I'll be spending a lot more time on her, adding a lot more polish, and I'll be posting the time-lapse video in a couple of days. So keep your eyes peeled for that. If the video was helpful and you want me to keep making more, there's no better way to let me know than smashing the like button, engaging with the content, leaving a comment. I read them all. And by sharing this video in a mass email at work or at school, but don't blame me if you get in trouble. Lastly, if you have any suggestion for future videos, let me know down below.